This is CJSW Presents, the 2017 All-Candidate Forums for the Calgary elections, heard weekday mornings, Monday to Thursday on CJSW 90.9 FM in Calgary, broadcasting from Treaty 7 land.
Hello and welcome to CJSW's Mayoral Forum for the 2017 Municipal election. My name is Jaqs, Aquines, and I'll be moderating today's forum. Today, we'd like to acknowledge that the City of Calgary is located on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the people of the Treaty 7, and the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Mayoral candidates joining us in studio today are Andre Chabot, Emile Gabriel, Naheed Nenshi, and Bill Smith. Welcome, and thank you all for taking the time to participate in this forum. CJSW is convening these forums as a call to civic engagement and a way to inform and empower voters in the upcoming elections. You are all invited here to participate in a fair and mutually respectful exchange of ideas. You'll each be given the opportunity to share your plans as mayor and your vision for Calgary's future. I suggest that you use your allotted time wisely, and I insist that you respect other candidates and allow them their time on the mic. We're not interested in personal attacks or shouting matches, and I will intervene if things go off the rails. The format for the forum is as follows. In a moment, I will give each of you a chance to introduce yourselves. Next, you will each be asked to answer a series of questions that relate to citywide and issues-based topics. Finally, each candidate is allowed time for closing remarks. This time can be spent summarizing your own campaign or responding to remarks from other candidates as you choose. So, let's get started. First, let's hear a brief introduction from each candidate. You will have a minute to do so. We'll begin with you, Mr. Chabot.
Thank you. I'm a fourth generation born and raised Western Canadian. My family moved here in 1971, come from a farming family. My work experience, I would call a soup to nuts experience. I started out in the construction industry, spent 10 years there, went to electronics, took an electronics technologist course at DeVry, graduated top of my class with honors. Went on into the electronics industry where I did everything from shipping and receiving all the way to managing the company and starting my own company. So good breadth of knowledge, business understanding, and I've now spent the last 12 years and 7 months on city council as a councillor.
Thank you. And Mr. Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you. It is nice to be home. Dear student, let me start by asking, have you seen any poll showing that Mr. Nenshi or Mr. Smith or Mr. Chabot as front runners? In the meanwhile, the survey that is done by a researcher in politics science here at the university has consistently shown Gabriel as the front runner. Therefore, I am releasing now some of my specific plans. Number one, upon my election, there will be consolidation of city departments to create real efficiency for the first time. Applying my transferable skills and more than 20 years experience in transportation and urban planning, we will work on rebuilding Calgary to be the city of the future, inviting less traffic congestion, accessible transportation, and a balanced expansion. There will be no freezing of mayor and councillor salaries for 4 years, as Mr. Bill Smith promised. Rather, these salaries will be revisited to bring it in line with reasonable practices.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. And now Mr. Nenshi.
Well, thanks so much for having me. It is always great to be back, though it is nice that the studio is no longer in the basement. I'm a graduate of the University of Calgary, where I served as president of the Students' Union and read the news on CJSW, so it's always great to be back here. Over the last 7 years, I think that we have accomplished a lot in the city to be proud of. To create a city that is a beacon of opportunity for people of every background from around the world to come and live a life of dignity and prosperity in this place. But we have a lot more to do. And I want to focus, if re-elected over the next 4 years, on three things. A better economy, ensuring that there are jobs, there is job growth, and there are opportunities for people to participate in the economy, as well as a friendly business atmosphere. Stronger and safer communities, ensuring that we're investing in communities where people want to live, work, and play, including investments in the arts, in sport, and in recreation, and a smarter city hall. We have the lowest property taxes of any big city in Canada. We have an efficient system, and we need to continue to make sure we're serving citizens even better.
Thank you. And Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Jaqs. It's a pleasure to be back at the university. having received 2 degrees here from the University of Calgary, one in phys ed and one in law. And actually, we have 3 more in our family. My wife has one, and 2 of my sons have degrees here from the University of Calgary, so we're quite familiar with it. I'm a born and raised Calgarian. Grew up here, became a firefighter in 1990, and in 2000, as I mentioned, I went to law school here while working full-time as a firefighter and raising our 4 kids. So since then, I've been a small business owner and a lawyer. I consider that a small business because we're affected by the economy just as anybody else is. And I would hazard a guess, I'm probably about 99% sure that I'm the only one here out of the 4 that has a dinosaur tattoo on his ankle.
Thank you. And
Couldn't handle the pain.
And just a reminder, please keep your responses focused on your own campaign, not on anyone else's platforms, please. Okay, so first question. Mayor and council are instrumental in shaping the future of your ward and this city. What is your vision for the next 4 years? Mr. Gabriel, you have 1 minute to respond.
Okay, what was the question?
Mayor and council are instrumental in shaping the future of your ward and this city. What is your vision for the next 4 years?
Well, my vision for the city, as I just mentioned in my opening statement, that we have to rebuild the city properly. I am a civil engineer with 20 years experience, including urban planning and transportation. So I'm going to bring the skill to the city. First, we have to recognize the problem. The problem, according to the councillors in many meetings that I observed, has been described as hodgepodge planning. So there is a problem does exist. So first of all, we have to stop this hodgepodge planning, and we have to focus a number of important issues for the people and for any proper planning for a city. Congestion, we have to avoid congestion in our planning. Then we have to target certain high demand area like hospital, universities, airport. So our planning has to target this area to be able to provide accessible transportation to this area. The last thing I would like to mention, our expansion has to be balanced.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Mr. Nenshi.
We have been talking a lot during this campaign about the 3 things I mentioned earlier: a better economy, stronger and safer communities, and a smarter city hall. But all of those things together really play a part in ensuring a vision that includes prosperity and opportunity for everyone who comes here. We live in an increasingly harsh political climate where we have, even in public discourse, voices of division and anger and bitterness growing louder and louder and louder. We've had far too much down-talking of Calgary over the course of this campaign. We were named this summer as one of the best 5 cities in the world in which to live. This is something to be proud of, but it's also something that is fragile. And my vision includes working hard, as I've done for the last 7 years every day, to make sure that we maintain that. We maintain that amazing quality of life by investments in infrastructure, by investments in job creation, and by investments to ensure that the city is delivering services even better so that every single person has the chance to succeed here.
Thank you. And Mr. Smith.
Well, I think one of the most important things that we need to look at is that we've had a significant change in our economy over the last number of years, mainly due to the energy sector. And it doesn't appear by any forecast that we're going to see the rise back that we've seen historically coming out of these types of recessions. And I think one of the critical things that we need to do is focus on making Calgary one of the most business-friendly city in Canada. In that way, we'll be able to increase our revenues on the tax side. We'll draw people here. We'll make it an attractive place for people to come and live and work. And then I think we have to be very careful with how we spend those revenues as we go, making sure that it's fair and balanced and that we take into account our most vulnerable within the city.
Thank you. And Mr. Chabot.
Thank you. The city's been progressing recently in more of a revolutionary fashion than evolutionary fashion. There are gaps in our municipal development plan, specifically in putting jobs in closer proximity to people and people in closer proximity to jobs, reducing the infrastructure burden that is created by having single-purpose type communities being developed. We've gotten better at it, but there's other ways to be more revolutionary in our development plans. Obviously, we need to reduce our regulatory burdens to make it easier for people to set up shop and do business in our city. And we need to rise up above other cities and be a city of choice, a city of destination that can do significantly more in economic development through technological advancements.
Thank you. Calgary has one of the highest rates of fentanyl-related deaths in Alberta and has experienced the most fatalities this year. What would support, as mayor, increasing access to harm reduction services? Mr. Nenshi, you have 1.5 minutes to respond.
This is an extraordinary crisis. We lose 3 to 4 people in Calgary every week to fentanyl overdose. And some of those people die on the street downtown, but the majority of them die in every neighborhood in the city, in residence rooms and rec rooms and kitchens and garages and cars, in every neighborhood. They're of every age, they're of every income level, they're of every family background. They have every path that they've taken that has ended in this addiction. And we got to do something about it. We lose more people to this crisis than we lose to car collisions and violent crime combined. So clearly, governments across the country have to wake up to this. And it's very important that our strategy look at all 4 pillars that need to work here. The first is prevention. The second is treatment. The third is enforcement. And the fourth is harm reduction. You can't do any of those without the others. Treatment beds have to be available. We have to work on the pathways that get people into addiction. We have to fight the supply and make sure that we're enforcing hard against that. And yes, we do need harm reduction, including safe consumption sites. I've been on a long journey on this one. I never liked safe consumption sites. I thought they were an admission of failure on our part. But the evidence is crystal clear. They save lives. You can't treat someone who's dead. And our job needs to be to save people's lives and to help people get better. And the way to do that is by focusing on all 4 of those things at the same time and leveraging the provincial and federal financing to make sure we're helping the people who need the help.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, same question.
You know, as a former firefighter, I had the unfortunate but fortunate experiences of dealing with drug overdoses on a somewhat regular basis, and the effect that those have on a family is just, it's devastating and it's heartbreaking to see. And I have not experienced the levels that the opioid crisis has caused. I hear from my fellow firefighters that I worked with that it's gotten to such high proportions on the emergency response side that it's very difficult to imagine, and we need to work together with our partners, both in the province and federally, with our police services and our treatment services, to ensure that we can do everything we can to help people that are firstly addicted to these drugs, that are having access to them, and to just ensure that we act in the best interest of all Calgarians by fighting this issue.
Thank you. Mr. Chabot.
Thank you. Obviously, this is a terrible crisis. The pharmaceutical companies have pushed opioid drugs way too heavily. New technologies, new pain reduction therapy, obviously, and drugs need to be promoted at a federal level. We need to advocate for that. We obviously need more enforcement. There's too many drugs coming into our country from other countries, and I'm not a big fan of safe injection sites, but alternative treatments, addiction treatment obviously is critical, and one of the more important things right now, we need to save lives. We need to provide, I believe it's called naloxone, to at least prevent those people who have overdosed from dying, and we need to have more of that made available more generally. There's just not enough out there.
Thank you. And Mr. Gabriel.
Yes, because I come from a different world, the world of management, we always look for practical solutions after understanding the problem. For example, a study done in West Virginia showed that this opioid crisis and drug crisis there are related to high unemployment. They have one of the highest unemployment, which we have here in Calgary, actually. I also approach this from a compassionate point of view. So we have to tackle 3 issues here. We have to grow our local economy because money helps us to solve lots of problems. We have a terrible local economy here, and nothing has been done about it for the last 7 years, I suppose. Secondly, yes, we need to save lives. Like Mr. Nenshi said, you cannot help somebody dead. So we need to work in the local economy, and I have a plan for that. Then we need to save life as a short-term measure. But also we have to have a long-term measure, which is we have to have psychologists or workers, social workers, to sit down with those people and start educate the population. Also help those people to get out of this and direct them towards more positive way of life. Thank you.
Thank you. We've seen the presence of far-right hate groups who target Muslims, Jews, immigrants, people of color, and members of the 2S LGBTQ+ communities grow at alarming rates in Calgary and Alberta at large. What is your message to hate groups, and how will you implement anti-racist initiatives in Calgary? First question, this will go to Bill Smith. Mr. Bill Smith.
Thank you.
For a minute and a half.
Pardon me?
For a minute and a half.
Minute and a half. Thank
Yep.
you. You know, I just don't have much tolerance for hate groups. I've never been able to figure out why people want to discriminate against a particular race or person or gender or anything like that, and it's very troubling to me. Knowing that there is some rights of free speech, we do have to ensure that we're not putting somebody into a hate category just because we disagree with them. I'm fine, with people. We can have disagreements with folks. We can hopefully sit across the table or sit in a room and have disagreements and talk about them. And that's one of the beautiful things about being a Canadian and being here in Calgary. But once it gets into the realm of hate, I have no tolerance for it, and strongly support any measures that we would take against it.
Thank you. Mr. Chabot?
Thank you. These guys will say I sound like a broken record. One of the things that myself, Mr. Cece, and Diane Collier-Cart did a number of years ago is we brought forward a motion to be one of the cities recognized as a city of Canadian municipalities against racial discrimination. We quickly identified that the scope of that initiative was too limiting, because it was limited strictly on racial discrimination. So we expanded the scope of that initiative to include gender, age, disabilities, whatever that disability happened to be, cognitive or physical, to be more inclusionary as a community. So we've allowed that, or we've promoted that throughout the organization, and we've started reaching out to the private sector to try and promote that sort of attitude and that sort of inclusion in employment, as well as some of our committees. We've actually created a committee at the City of Calgary to provide more diversity amongst our committees as well. But ultimately, I think the best way is by example. There's been comments about some individuals not being respectful of others. And if you want people to start echoing that sense of respect, you have to show respect in order to get respect. And I think it has to permeate from the top.
Thank you. Mr. Gabriel?
Yes, so when you speak about hate and persecution, that hits home, because that's the country I left behind, and for that reason, I experienced it. I have seen people in my family not just being hated, but being killed. And on the other hand, I think I'm suited to be the person who can bring peace, because I come from a mixed family. My father is Egyptian, but my mother is European. So I relate to lots of people. But again, I go back to my point about practicality. We always look for a practical solution versus preaching. So I have a plan. When I become a mayor, I will gonna have some sort of a meeting in the different communities, say every 3 months or whatever, where people can come together and allow them to speak about things they did to bring people together. There are active people in our community trying to bring peace and generate dialogue. So I will gonna state that as a practice, and possibly around the meal, because food brings people together. So that's a part of my plan to deal with the hate crime. I would also like to mention to you from a practical point of view, people don't realize that poverty sometimes creates hate because people hate other people when they feel poor. And I go back to my plan for economy. We have to improve our local economy to solve many problems. And as I mentioned, I have a plan for that. You can see it on my website.
Thank you. Mr. Nenshi.
This is a very serious problem around the world and in our community as well. And we have to be able to get beyond platitudes and really get to very serious action, which can involve naming and shaming this kind of behavior, but also understanding that the core success of Calgary is precisely because of our pluralism. Precisely because we've created a place where we can honestly say that it doesn't matter what you look like or where you come from or how you worship or whom you love or who your daddy was. Everyone has the chance here to live a life of dignity. Everyone has the chance here to live a successful life. And we've got a lot of work to do there. Politicians have a role to play. It has been both my honor, but I also think my duty over the last 7 years to speak out for pluralism and the dignity of every human being, locally, nationally, and internationally. Politicians have to avoid the easy temptation of flirting with the small-minded and the intolerance for short-term political gain, and we're seeing far too much of it. But it also requires every single one of us to act. Every single one of us who believes in kindness and compassion and mercy. We cannot allow ourselves to be shouted down by the bigots. And that's happening online. It's happening inline at the Tim Hortons. And we as everyday people must use our everyday voices to ensure that we are standing up for opportunity for every single person who shares this land.
Thank you. Stats Canada charted a 39% increase in reported hate crimes from 2014 to 2015 in Alberta. The recent racist death threats against school trustee candidate Nimra Amjad illustrate the severity of these incidents. Can you explain what you would do to tackle this? You have a minute and a half to respond, Mr. Chabot.
Wow, tough question. I struggled with this one when I read it. I think ultimately that sort of activity, a lot of it stems from some of the economic challenges that we face. And I think when people are out of work and struggling with all kinds of issues at home, there's a lot of domestic issues that permeate out into the community and can result in hate crimes. People tend to reach out when they're lacking in food and other amenities from their kids. I think job creation would go a long ways to helping alleviate some of that. But that's not all. We have to lead by example and show that we will not tolerate this sort of activity and take a stand anywhere and everywhere that it occurs and lead by example again by saying we will not tolerate this in this community.
Thank you. Mr. Gabriel.
Well, I realize that this question relates to the previous one, so I just bring another point here that is important to pay attention to. Our chief here, chief of police, he made a number of times he made the comment saying that he realized that the crime in our city seemed to be related to the unemployment situation. So as just Mr. Chabot finished saying, which I already mentioned before, we have to improve our local economy to give the people the dignity of work. And I also mentioned this creative idea about having people coming together every certain period in the year and allowing people to speak about the things they did to bring community together, to understand different culture, different religion. I lived in Egypt surrounded by 3 main religions. I understand all those religions. That's one of the assets that I can bring to the city. So you have to come up with creative idea, but above all, we need to start talk about love and accepting each other. You instructing us not to fight. And you realize that in the last couple debates, I offered Mr. Nenshi to accept a hug from me, and he finally took the hug last debate. So, you gotta rise above this old politics. That's why my campaign goes with the slogan, no more career politicians. We have to look at the city of Calgary as one family, and we have to love each other even if we have different ideas. No more hugs, by the way.
What? I'm very crushed by
very,
this.
very greedy.
I would be too. I never got offered a hug.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel.
You know, what happened to Nimra Amjad is an example of the hardening and harshening of political discourse. And here's someone who wants to run for school board trustee, the most thankless public job there is. You just want to help the kids. And nobody deserves that. And I got to tell you, in my own life, the first 5 years in public life, I can probably count on one hand the number of hateful, bigoted, racist comments I got. Nowadays, every single day. And what I get is a tiny portion of what women in public life get. So as I said before, politicians have a role to play, to call this out, to resist that urge to hang out with the small-minded because they vote, and to make sure that we call it out and tell people, I don't want your support if that's what you believe in. But there's also other practical things we have to do. The Calgary Police Service needs the resources to continue to do the work they do, not just putting the bad guys in jail, but to ensure that they continue to work with youth at risk, they continue to work with anti-radicalization programs, they continue to work with community partners to ensure that we are preventing these attitudes in the first place. We know that people who end up on the far right are the same people who used to join gangs. It's caused by social isolation, and it's a matter of helping make that happen. And then we as individuals need to stand up as well. My colleague in Edmonton, Mayor Don Iveson, has a great initiative called Make It Awkward, to make it awkward to start spreading this kind of talk, because it's the talk that eventually leads to the crime.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Jaqs. Things like this, I just are incongruent with my way of thinking, and I am always shocked and horrified by the things that occur. I think that you see it. You see it more. I see it more now that we're online and more active online and things of that nature. And I think we have to say no, that these things have to stop. And I've seen even on my own Facebook page and on our Twitter, I've seen references to Naheed, which shock me and appall me, and we block those and we get rid of those right away. And frankly, I don't want those people supporting me. I think we need to, as politicians and as leaders in the community, stand up and say, no, this is not acceptable, and just not tolerate it anymore.
Thank you. In 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released 94 calls to action for all levels of government, many of which apply to municipal governments. Based on these calls, what actions will you take to move towards reconciliation? Mr. Gabriel, you have a minute and a half to respond.
Yeah, again, I go back to the practicality. I don't preach and don't have any slogan to offer anybody. So I took an action. I met with Tsuut'ina Nation to understand their concern, and surprisingly, their concern actually was about the flood, a subject that we haven't covered enough. It's been mentioned by my neighbor here, Mr. Nenshi, that the flood is more important than health or education. And we have an issue here that the flood is, they have a plan for Springbank, but the company that's been hired to consult the province said this is not a robust solution. And we don't have a backup plan if the dam failed. So this is so serious. And I spoke to them about that. I spoke to them about other issues they are concerned about. So my plan is to work with the First Nation people, and I realized they are very accepting to me. And the whole idea here, I wanted to approach them from win-win situation, style of a business approach. They have interest in growing their community and helping the people on drugs and the problem that they have in society. We want to work with them to solve this problem as partners. So that's what I have done so far.
Thank you. Mr. Nenshi.
I never knew when I became mayor that so much of my life's work would be guided by reconciliation. And I want to encourage every single Calgarian to read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, and also to read the report that the Calgary Aboriginal Urban Affairs Committee, a group of volunteers who advise me and council, have written in terms of the city's response. It's called White Goose Flying. And it really lays out a roadmap for what reconciliation has to look like here at the city. And to start with, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission actually asks that we make symbolic gestures of reconciliation. I proclaimed the year 2015, first time ever we proclaimed an entire year as the year of reconciliation, so that throughout our community we can talk about how to make that work. Every time I speak in public, multiple times a day, I start with a land acknowledgement. These are small things. We've raised the Treaty 7 flag permanently at City Hall. Again, small things, but important for us to understand that we are all treaty people and the pathway to reconciliation runs with all of us. We're working hard to redefine our relationships both with our Treaty 7 and Métis neighbors, as well as urban Indigenous people who come from every Indigenous community in the world. I am, greatly honored that I have been brought into both the Blackfoot and the Tsuut'ina nations with my honorary names in those nations, but it's not about me. It's about every single one of us living and breathing reconciliation every day.
Thank you. Mr. Smith.
What's happened in the past has been, again, terrible for our First Nations, and the path to reconciliation is clearly something that we need to work very hard and diligently at. A few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to sit with a gentleman from the Blackfoot Nation and spend a few hours with him. And you as a Calgarian growing up, we often just assumed everybody would sort of become Calgarians at some point in time, and that's generally what's happened. The second generation of immigrants becomes very similar to the folks that were here, the Europeans that came here. But I learned through that conversation that there is a very different culture in the First Nations versus where I come from, and a very different thought process about how they look at the earth and nature. And I think my journey along the way here has helped to open my eyes to be more thoughtful and more reflective about that. And I hope to be able to continue that on when I become the mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Chabot.
As was mentioned, the Truth and Reconciliation initiative talks about recognizing those wrongs that occurred in the past and doing what we can to right some of those wrongs. And the City of Calgary did recognize that one of those wrongs specifically was the Langevin Bridge, and so we decided to change it to the Truth and Reconciliation Bridge. And the White Goose report that was mentioned did identify 94 or so recommendations on how to recognize where we're falling behind on making amends for sins of the past. 43, I believe, of those recommendations were focused around what you can do at a municipal level. We've had the Urban Aboriginal Committee at the city for many years now, and there's been a few positive outcomes that have come out of that. But out of the White Goose report, and after it went through council, one of the recommendations that council decided on at that time was how we can make it better by creating a committee and allocating funds to give them resources to be able to actually action some of those things in the White Goose report. Obviously, I supported that and would continue to support that and any initiatives that come out of that.
Thank you. In July, Council approved a motion to look into ways of achieving gender equity and diversity in City of Calgary boards, commissions, committees, on council, and within the city's workforce. What action would you like to see taken towards this goal? Mr. Nenshi, you have a minute and a half.
I was very supportive of that motion at council for us to look at all three of these things, and perhaps I can just break them down. The first is achieving diversity, better diversity across the city's boards, commissions, and committees. This has been something I've been working on for 7 years, reaching out further into the community, getting more applications from diverse people in the community. And in fact, Councillor Chabot and I served on council's very first ever nominating committee last year. And in that work, we really were looking at inclusion and representation amongst the volunteers who serve on those committees. And I think we've done a pretty good job. We need to continue doing that work, but that is the easiest of the three. The second one is about diversity within the city's workforce. The city is a very large employer, nearly 20,000 colleagues at the city, second largest employer in Calgary. And we're very, very good at hiring a diverse workforce and a gender inclusive workforce, and we're not good at promoting. And so I've asked city management to take a hard look at what, if any, systemic barriers there are that are keeping people from advancing through the workforce into the middle management and senior management levels. The last piece is about representation politically. You know, when I was first elected, I spearheaded the change from alderman to councillor, just a tiny symbolic change. And for my pains, I was rewarded with the smallest number of female candidates in 2013 in decades. We have 2 women on council, the smallest in decades. We have to do a better job. We have to ask her. We have to fund her. We have to help her run her campaign. We have to help her get elected.
Thank you. Mr. Smith?
Well, I think that gender equity, and I applaud the council for the motion that they did pass this year. I think it was a very good initiative. Gender equity often comes down to a lot of times if you can encourage and mentor somebody that will maybe take up a position and try to give them the support that they need in order to be successful. I found in the early days when I was a firefighter, we had very few female firefighters on the job. And I know that they went through some very difficult and traumatic times becoming established and staying with the career until I think modern day we are much more thoughtful and considerate of their skills and their ability to perform. It's unfortunately, it's an uphill battle for them. And I think we need to do everything we can do to support them. And the same on the political side. I mean, it's as everybody up here will suggest, it's a bit of a rough and tumble game at times. And you need to make sure that you have the proper support network in to help you go through the tough times. So,
thank you. Mr. Chabot.
Thank you. Diversity on our boards and commissions, and committees and commissions is something that we have been moving forward as a city of Calgary in many different aspects. Obviously, as one of the committee members, we did look at diversity, not just from a gender perspective, but a multitude of different fronts. As a father of 4 girls, I promoted my girls to rise above the rhetoric of women versus men, and always said to them that you can do more than any boy can, or as well or better as any boy or man can. And just because I said that doesn't mean that I didn't recognize that they face significant challenges as women. And they told me a lot about that. And so far as even though they had the strength to move forward, that they were not being viewed equally as men. So from a promotions perspective, they had to do so much more than the men to achieve the same sort of objectives. And I think recognizing the value of individuals regardless of their gender is something that we need to do a lot more to try and make sure that there's equal opportunity regardless of your race, color, gender, or what have you. And women in particular need better support.
Thank you. And to you, Mr. Gabriel.
Yes. So we have to do a little bit of analysis here to understand the problem. Passing a motion recommendations didn't work. We have to really pay attention to that. And the fact is that the city councilor under the current leadership receiving a failing grade because the approval rating for the city councilor is 35. That's a failing grade. So we have to realize that passing a motion and recommending things doesn't work. What is the people looking for really? They are looking for a leadership by example. The report came out a couple days ago showing mistreatment of women in the city hall, and nothing done about it. Matter of fact, they're trying to hide the report. I put the report on my Facebook. So the proof is in the pudding. Recommendation and talk and preaching doesn't work. What is missing is leadership by example. And that's what I'm going to bring to the city. As of this moment, I met with a number of ladies running for councillor, and I encourage them. And we talk about things we need to do. One of the things they like to commit themselves to is to commit themselves to term limits, because we want to end the era of career politicians. That's one of the reasons, the root cause of our problem, that we have career politicians running to make a career out of it, and they don't care about you.
Thank you. The city of Calgary has roughly the same footprint as New York City, but less than a tenth of the population. What are your plans to help Calgary grow in an environmentally responsible way? Mr. Smith, you have a minute and a half.
Well, we do have a large footprint, but we also have to bear in mind that we have two of the largest urban parks in North America within our borders, as well as our airport is in there. So sometimes the comparison is maybe not quite the ratio that we see it is. But I think it's important that in terms of growing in an environmentally responsible way, that we have to always be aware of what our carbon footprint is and look for ways in terms of we do know that vehicles create the CO2, which is an issue with respect to global warming. How we can make those any new neighborhoods efficient and travel times efficient, and encourage the use of other modes of transportation, most especially public transit, and make that affordable and accessible for people.
Thank you. Mr. Chabot.
Yes, thank you. It's interesting how we get compared to New York City rather than other cities in Canada. I would argue that our environmental footprint may not be as large as what is portrayed. And as was mentioned, we have some huge green spaces in our city that certainly puts us lower on that scale when you do a direct comparative analysis. But people come to Calgary because of that quality of life, because of those large green spaces. I don't think the urban footprint is being well represented here. If you look at how we have sustainable communities and the urban form, the urban built form, if it's done in a sustainable fashion, having large tracts of green space between those compact urban forms, I think would achieve the same objective while still providing that opportunity to have that nice green space, that nice quality of life addition to our city of Calgary. And I think there's other issues. We obviously right now we can't look at decentralizing our downtown as much as I think we could in the future, but ultimately we've created these mobility challenges that we have now because of that centralized downtown core. But I think we need to do it in an evolutionary fashion, not a revolutionary fashion.
Thank you. Mr. Gabriel.
Okay, so let's just take a closer look at the problem. As we speak, today there are congestion everywhere in the city. There are accidents almost every day in their food. I mentioned earlier that the city is poorly planned. The Green Line, politically planned, not intelligently or engineeringly. I spent 4 years learning how to plan city and 20 years experience. So people have to think who really can benefit the city more. So what we have to do is to set aside the politics. And that's why I kept saying we need to get rid of this career politicians who are more concerned about getting re-elected than doing the right thing for the people. That is the root cause of the problem. So you get somebody who has the experience. Then we start thinking intelligently and using the knowledge and the skill that we learn and practice. You plan the city properly. You look at the high demand areas, like I mentioned, hospitals, universities, airports. And then you start planning your expansion wisely and sensibly between high rises, dense area versus different type of accommodations. You have to plan this sensibly using your knowledge and skills. The other thing is you have to plan your transportation to meet the needs, to be accessible and to be efficient. People don't have to wait 4 hours to get home. So that's what I'm offering the city and we're going to bring to the city as the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. And finally on this question, Mr. Nenshi.
I have to say it is a little bit funny to hear that old canard that this is not a fair comparison. In fact, New York has Central Park, Prospect Park, some of the largest urban green spaces in the world, and not one but 2 international airports within its boundaries. So it is very true that Calgary's population density versus the land that we use is very much out of whack, even with other Canadian cities. If you recall, in 2013, I ran the election based on ending what I called the suburban sprawl subsidy, where we were actually making it much easier for developers to build in greenfield brand new neighborhoods on the fringes of the city than to redevelop existing neighborhoods. And while that was a bitterly fought election, while there were a lot of forces that are active in this election as well trying to stop that, in the end it passed unanimously. And that one change has really changed Calgary's growth pattern towards much more sustainable use of land. While we're talking about stewardship of land, of course, we've rolled out the green carts this fall, which will help us reduce our reliance on landfills. When we talk about stewardship of water, we're about the best in the world at doing this. We use as much water today as we did when I was a student at the University of Calgary, despite almost double the population. We've done a great job on that. We got to work on flood mitigation. Finally, we have to manage our air through investments in things like public transit. In the end, Calgary met its Kyoto commitments many years ago. We are incredibly sustainable. The city uses 100% renewable energy, and we have to continue to reduce that environmental footprint.
Thank you, Mr. Nenshi. We're going to move into concluding statements. Candidates will have a chance to give a brief conclusion for 1 minute. We'll begin with Mr. Chabot.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting us here today. It's been a true pleasure. I always enjoy these sort of forums because, if nothing else, you get an opportunity to bring forward new ideas. I've spent the last 12 and a half years, 12 and 3/4 years on council, and during that time, I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about leadership. I've learned a lot about how to make our finances work. I know where there's flexibility within our finances. I have an extensive knowledge of our revenue streams and our expenses. I think right now we're in a critical point in our development of our city, including ensuring that we build in a sustainable fashion, that we live within our means. We're in a tough economic time. We need to promote more jobs and encourage any kind of development that we can, as long as it's done sustainably. And we're challenged right now with legislative changes that are coming down the pipe. We need somebody at the table who has the knowledge and experience to move forward the city charter and the municipal government amendments. That's why I'm asking for your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Gabriel.
Yeah, thank you. Again, as I said, it's nice to be home. And I will remind you what I said earlier. Have you seen any poll showing Mr. Nenshi, Smith, or Chabot as front-runner? In the meantime, the survey that is done by a researcher in political science here at the university has consistently shown Gabriel as the front-runner. Therefore, I am releasing now some of my specific plans. Upon my election, there will be consolidation of city departments to create real efficiency for the first time. I will apply my transfer skills and more than 20 years experience in transportation and urban planning. We will work on rebuilding our city, Calgary, to be the city of the future, inviting less traffic congestion, accessible transportation, and a balanced expansion. There will be no freezing of mayor and councillor salaries as one of the candidates proposed. Rather, the salary will be revisited to meet current practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nenshi.
We have so much to be proud of in this city. This summer, we were named one of the best 5 cities in the world in which to live. We've created a place of unprecedented prosperity, even in an economic downturn, and of opportunity for everyone. But this is at serious risk. We run a risk of losing all we've gained. We run a risk of going backwards. We run a risk of becoming a smaller, meaner place, a place where that opportunity no longer exists. It's incredibly important that people come out and vote. It's incredibly important that people inform themselves of the issues. There is advanced polls on the University of Calgary campus where people from all over the city can vote. And we have to work towards a better economy, stronger and safer communities, a smarter city hall. Check out nenshi.ca for some details on those platforms. But I hope that we will continue the choice we made 7 years ago to make this city a place that turns its face proudly towards the future and one that does not go backwards. Let's move Calgary forward together.
Thank you, Mr. Nenshi. And Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Thanks to CJSW for this opportunity today to have a very peaceful conversation amongst us, which is refreshing. I would like to encourage all of your listeners to seriously consider taking the time to vote on October 16th or go to an advanced poll. It's a very, very important part of our society, and I think we need to make sure that we get out as many people to participate in that process as possible. I look forward to having the opportunity to work with the University of Calgary as the mayor of Calgary, And I think we can build a wonderful partnership going forward. And I wish the Dinos all the best luck against UBC this weekend. Go get them.
Thank you, gentlemen. This concludes CJSW's 2017 Mayoral Forum. Thanks to the candidates for participating and to you at home for taking the time to listen. Please join the discussion by posting comments and questions via your chosen platform. Encourage your friends and family to listen to or watch this forum. Inform yourselves about issues facing your ward and your city, and get out and vote on October 16th. I'm Jaqs Aquines signing off for CJSW 90.9 FM.
And that was CJSW Presents, the 2017 all-candidate forums for the Calgary elections, heard every weekday morning from Monday to Thursday, leading up to the election day on October 16th. For more information on your ward and mayoral candidates, and to hear the full audio from each forum, visit cjsw.com/elections. And please, make sure to vote on Monday, October 16th.